All right, welcome back to another episode of Just Buy Less Coffee, answering the deeper questions of American politics. My name is Troy, aka Keep Troy Blue. With me, as always, is Cathy Cannon, aka Cannon's Fodder. We got a pretty full show for you today. Cathy's going to do a deep dive on presidential debates of the modern era as the absolutely horrendous, guaranteed horrendous shit show that is the Trump Biden debate is coming up later this week on Thursday. We're gonna look at some debates of the past. We've also got a couple of news stories to get through. I look like absolute crap. I look like a toddler dad right now. I don't think I've showered in 3 days, so I just want to let everyone know that that's my excuse for how crappy I look right now. But anyway, how are you? How are you, Cathy? The Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup. Oh God, it was close though. It was Game 7. Edmonton came back down from 0 to 3, and they tied it up 3-3, went to Game 7, and then Florida ended up winning anyway. But anyway, how are you doing? How's your
I woke up to a text message from my dad with a bunch of rats. So for those who listened last week, you know, like, I guess the rat thing is still a thing. I didn't know. So
they threw the rats on the ice, and apparently the mascot is a rat, and I would have had no idea what that meant without you explaining it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I saw the rat mascot, and I went, huh, yeah, I get it now. I bet no one else does, but I get it.
Yeah, no. So the rats are still a thing. So good for them. The rats have been good luck, I guess. Whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. So they beat the Edmonton Oilers. I wouldn't have put
Canada
money on
hockey.
that. I'm not gonna lie. All right. Like, that's all they had.
So your family's like Florida loyalty outdoes their Canadian loyalty when it comes to like NHL type stuff, because Canada hasn't, a Canadian team hasn't won the Stanley Cup since like the early 90s, and the poor Canadians are starting to get a little upset about it. So
yeah, they're not as good at capitalizing their favorite sport as Americans, clearly. Take a note from the Queen's realm, or the King's realm now, isn't it? But no, I mean, my two brothers both played hockey a little bit when they were kids. My younger brother stuck with it a lot more. He still cares about hockey. His favorite team growing up was the Pittsburgh Penguins, though, randomly.
Okay.
But it was the Mario Lemieux era, and then
I was gonna say they were good back in the day.
And Jaromir Jagr. I know all of these fucking like hockey players for some, like, because my little brother was obsessed with hockey. He still is. Like, I literally just the other day found a single like skate that he'd left at my house from when he was in like the Navy, probably. Had no tongue in it. Like, it was like I threw it away. Don't tell him I threw it away, but I threw it away because it was like, it had no tongue. It had the blade was all rusted, and it was one of them. So whatever. But then he liked Sidney Crosby. I guess that's a guy who's a thing. And he goes to, because he lives in North Carolina, he goes to Hurricane games a lot. Fun fact, I babysat for one of the Carolina Hurricanes way back in the day.
Is there any way you didn't babysit? I feel like you babysat everybody, like everybody famous.
Dude, not everybody famous, but he had like a keg of maple syrup in his pantry. I remember that, and his kids were bratty. I won't say their names, but no. But John Van Beesbrook's kid was like, I think his name's Ian. Like, played hockey with my little brother when they were kids. So the Beezer, he was the goalie for he was the goalie at the time that the rat thing became a thing. So yes, like,
small world.
Yeah, I'm always like 3 degrees of separation from cool shit, but always got left behind because nobody liked me. So I was like on the anterior of everybody's fun time. So I got to watch.
Well, there's like 10 people.
My Ramona Quimby book. I was just like, look at all the fun they're having.
There's like 10 people that live in Canada, so you all knew each other at some point.
That's what it is.
So the 2-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision was this week. Jesus, we did a show about that 2 years ago. We've been doing this shit for a while. Overturning Roe versus Wade. That was this week. Other SCOTUS decisions coming up. Hey, I just got pinged like right before we started about a decision. Approval of, I don't know, you may have already known this, I guess it was a few hours ago. Approval of a first publicly funded religious charter school ruled unconstitutional.
Yes, so, I did see that, actually.
So the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled that their religious charter school is unconstitutional. Can't have religious public schools, confirmed. So there you go. So that's
So
cool.
far, like what makes me nervous is the federal appeal and this SCOTUS. But you know what? That's going to
Yeah,
be a different episode, isn't it?
that'll
So,
be a different episode. Big one again, Trump immunity. They are taking a fucking minute. What's your analysis on that? I'm hearing that one's going to come out this Friday. This is making me really nervous. That means it'll be one of like the last the rulings that they make. Why are they
mhm.
waiting for it to come out on a Friday? I don't know. Am I reading too much into that, or is this?
Mm,
Should we be freaking
could
out a little bit about that?
Could be a lot of things, and I was thinking about it too. And for those of you who've ever worked in like press relations or anything like that, you know that there's the period of time where nobody gives a fuck about the news, right? And it's usually Thursday afternoon, but especially Friday afternoon.
Yeah,
So if there's
Friday
a
everything just falls
story
off.
you Right, if there's a story you don't want to pick up steam, like that you kind of wanna go under the radar a little
Exactly.
bit, that's when you release the story.
You
So,
just dump it on
um,
Friday and hope no one notices.
but yeah, but this Friday, it's the 28th of June, but it's also like the weekend before the 4th of July week, because 4th of July is on like what, Wednesday or Thursday, I think
Yeah.
Thursday. So a lot of people might be going out of town until the 4th, or a lot of people will be leaving town like right before the 4th. So basically nobody's going to give a fuck about the news between like now and Monday at the very least, which is going to be July 1st. Um,
Wait, the
so
4th of July, you mean UK election day?
I do mean UK election day. I'm like
Yeah.
staring at the calendar right now. So my guess is that no matter what they rule on that decision, it's going to piss off some people.
Oh, okay. So
So
you're saying they're it could go either way because it's
it
as a
could
Friday
go,
sort of dump
yeah.
ruling.
So
Yeah.
the timing of it, I feel like could go either way, right?
Okay.
It's like they're just kind of like holding it off for as long as they can
That's
until
interesting.
people are like super distracted. And the closer you get to the 4th of July, I guess maybe they feel like the
Yeah.
people like the Trumpy people might be distracted with their fireworks and shit, but that could also backfire because they have a bunch of fireworks and shit. So,
It's not a good time. Everybody's armed with explosives around that week. So, yeah.
but I don't know. So, as far as why they're waiting so long, I think it's because it's a big fucking deal and they're scared to release it no matter which way it goes. Um,
I think
by
yeah, I mean
They're
I
releasing
think
it
that
what, the day after the debate.
day
So
after the debate, yeah.
maybe they're waiting to, like, let everybody see Donald Trump completely drool on himself on TV, and
The
then, like, the idea of him getting tried in court is less embarrassing. I don't know, like, it could go. Did you see how he's, like, telling everyone he's gonna lose the debate now? He's like, "Oh, maybe I'll lose it on purpose." What
He's
an asshole.
they're so fucking afraid of
Mhm.
it's hilarious because they've spent the last 3 years trying to cultivate this false image of President Biden as some like senile old man who like poops his pants and can't find his way around the room. But that's all based entirely on their creation of like editing these like 3-second clips of Biden that hasn't been true the entire time. Every single time that they've clipped a speech, they clip 3 seconds out of an hour-long speech where the speech is
Mhm.
fine. And they were forced to come to that reality during the State of the Union because we all had to watch the fucking State of the Union. Everybody watched the State of the Union. They were
Yeah,
all
but then he
watching the
was on
State of the
drugs,
Union
remember,
to
so
see like Biden like just shit his pants, and he Biden fucking killed it that night. And they were all like scrambling to figure out what happened to our narrative that Biden is out of his mind. Well, what they came up with was that he's on drugs.
he was on drugs,
He's taking
exactly.
performance enhancing drugs whenever he's got to give a big speech. So that's what they're
Remember,
running
every
with.
accusation is a
Yeah,
confession with them.
I
Just letting
guarantee you it
y'all
is. I
know.
guarantee you Trump is on so many fucking drugs. But yeah, so
Well, he's like
they're
a well-known cocaine user since the
there's
'80s,
they're
I mean,
spinning
like,
two things. It's the Republicans have been doing this since fucking Reagan.
never.
In that the strategy is that Republicans never lose, right? Even if they lose, they win.
Exactly.
And so they're spinning it to be like if Trump has a terrible night and Biden kicks his ass, one, Biden must have been on drugs. And then two, it's the CNN moderator thing. They're going to say that like it was rigged or whatever. But yeah, I just think
Yeah,
it's interesting that they're so afraid of Biden doing well that they're in hyper spin mode about him on being being
I
on
know.
like drugs.
Already, it's like they're giving away the game, like, before it even starts, but it's because they're with Donald Trump every day. They can sleep like, I don't know, like, I can tell just from clips and stuff that I see of him, like, when I can stomach watching one of his speeches for a little bit, like, like the ones that his campaign puts up. So not like the cut ones, like the long droney, here's a 12-minute clip of the rally. That's a bunch of nothing. Like he rambles. He doesn't know what's going on. He's reading a teleprompter, but can't even figure out when the teleprompter gave him a wrong word, and then has an argument with himself on the stage about what the word's supposed to mean, whilst trying to pretend it's a word Joe Biden came up with and is using to confuse people. Like, it's fucking bananas. And I think that they're terrified of him going on TV, and they couldn't talk him out of it. Like, they managed to talk him out of the Republican debates because I think they were afraid if he participated in them, he might lose. But now that he's the candidate,
He's
like,
terrible. He's terrible in debates. They have every
he's
right to be afraid.
terrible at debates. And then, like, I saw something, like, they asked him, what debate prep are you doing? And he's like, oh, I think this is it. I'm at a crowd, people yelling questions at me. I'm like, you're pre-curated crowd, half of whom are paid to be there, yelling questions that you've approved for them to ask. That is not debate prep, honey. Like, that is not that is not debate prep. So it's gonna be a fucking disaster. And I know I have to watch it, but I want everybody to be aware that it is going to cause me great pain to do so. And you owe me.
We will be watching it.
You owe me so big.
I can't play it yet on the show. I wish I could, because it's going to probably be coming out just a couple of hours. But we do have a new Midas video coming out that catalogs all of Trump's gaffes and ridiculousness, and it's hilarious. I can't play it because it's not public yet, but I'll play it probably on the show next week when it comes out. But yeah, just really bad. Like, really, just the guy is like, it's really all projection with them, because Biden's actually fine. Trump's the one who's clearly like circling the drain. If you actually watch what watch.
I know, like, I saw one of the clips somebody put up on Twitter. They're like, oh, look at Joe Biden. He froze on stage, and they showed the clip and he stood still for 3 seconds while smiling at a photographer. I'm like, and they're like, oh, and Obama had to take him away. I'm like, I don't see where he froze. I see him awkwardly standing for a photograph and Obama being like, all right, let's go. Because Joe Biden will stay on a rope line all fucking day if you let him. And Barry has places to be.
That's his problem, is that
like, that's why they guide him away.
The last one to leave. Like,
yeah, like they're not guiding him away because they're afraid he's going to like piss himself. They're guiding him away so they don't have to sit there and listen to the same story they've heard 87 times on the rope line that day. You know, like, he's an old man who likes to talk to people. Yeah. Whether they want to talk to him or not.
Well, speaking of Trump's, speaking of a Trump speech, so he just recently gave this little nugget at a recent.
They're so tough. Dana White. Did anyone ever hear of Dana White? He's a legend, right? UFC, ultimate fighter, ultimate fighting, and he's a fantastic man. I said, Dana, I have an idea. Why don't you set up a migrant league of fighters and have your regular league of fighters, and then you have the champion of your league. These are the greatest fighters in the world. Fight the champion of the migrants. I think the migrant guy might win. That's how tough they are. He didn't like that idea too much, but actually it's not the worst idea I've ever had.
It's not the worst
migrant
idea.
Fights.
That is not a great selling point. Okay, so not only is he like yelling for a throwback to segregated sports, but he's also alluding to a Hunger Games style immigration plan. I hate it here.
Hunger Games, sort of like Hunger Games meets like bum fights. I guess just like taking poor hungry people and making them fight each other for our entertainment.
How is this? Yeah. How is this timeline the same one where Travis Kelce carries Taylor Swift off the stage at the Eras Tour? Like, how are these?
I saw that warmed your cold dead heart. I saw that.
Is like where this beauty and magic is happening. There is also such shit can fuckery. Like,
duality of man, bro. I don't know. There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad.
Descartes losing his goddamn mind somewhere in hell right now.
So migrant fights is his whole thing. A bunch of people got really upset about that on Twitter, and of course Dana White.
The hell you say?
Just a legendary pig. Called everybody a crybaby over that, but he actually got ratioed pretty hard for the crybaby line too. Everyone was like, "Oh, really, Dana? Go fuck yourself." So yeah. We're still trying to find the bottom, Trump's bottom. We'll never find Trump's bottom. Trump's bottom's hidden in a closet somewhere.
It's just under a lot of diaper padding.
Speaking of Trump all the time today. All right, Trump's economic plan would trigger a recession, collapse the economy by 2025. That's next year. He wouldn't even take office until January 2025. So
basically meaning it would have an
immediately.
immediate effect, which is
According to
weird in
Moody's-
economics.
According to Moody's independent economic analysts, Trump's economic plan. So let's remind everyone what that is. Trump's Maganomics plan: slash taxes for the rich, spike import tariffs, and institute mass deportation of immigrant workers. So also dramatically shrinking the workforce in the United States was not something that gets talked about a lot. This is just assuming that he won't be able to fully implement his plan of eliminating all income tax and entirely funding the federal government via increased import tariffs. Let's just assume that he doesn't get to do all of that, but just a version of that. And we still have Moody's saying that he will basically trigger a recession by summer 2025. So
Yep.
pretty
Because
crazy.
the tariffs would have an immediate impact on prices. Like that's the thing with tariffs is economic policy has a lag time between like drafting the policy, putting it into place, preparing for its impacts and measuring its impacts. But tariffs are a snap of the fingers. That means overnight prices soar, and mass deportations, that's an overnight attack of your labor market, right? So it would also drive up wages that corporations aren't willing to pay. So it would be such a fucking cold, like goddamn
The
nightmare.
Moody's report predicts, and by the way, these are just economists, right? And a lot of these people are conservative economists. These are very like pro-capitalist, neoliberal economic theorists.
Yeah,
So
these are Fed
this is
Reserve
not
guys.
this is not Brookings. This is not like a left-wing economist, socialist economist group. These are normal, like, capitalists. Straight up quoting, Biden's policies are better for the economy, says Mark Zandi, chief economist of Moody's, who also worked for John McCain, by the way. He was one of McCain's advisors. So what they are, first of all, it would trigger recession. So recession just means an economy that is slowing down instead of growing. So we would have an economy that would slow to an average 1.3% annual growth versus 2.1% average under Biden. I'll let you comment on all these in a second, but let me run through them. So, and then also inflation would skyrocket. So right now we have inflation that's slowly cooling down, on track to hit the target of 2% by summer 2025 under Biden's plan, and a divided Congress. If in 2025 status quo stays with Biden and a divided Congress, we're on track to hit 2% inflation by summer 2025. With a Trump presidency, it would spike to 3.6% next year, 3.6% inflation. So really reigniting inflation in this country when it's on track to slow down. We would have 3.2 million fewer jobs and 4.5% unemployment. I think that's a little conservative at the end of Trump's term compared to Biden's 26 straight months of unemployment under 4%. Also, the increased tariffs and high inflation would increase the value of the dollar, leading to fewer exports of U.S. products, which would, of course, hurt manufacturers and their employees. And it's very unlikely that the import tariff revenue would offset the tax cuts. So you're also talking about dramatically increasing the national debt. So that's what you get with Trump's economic plan. What do you think, economist Hannon?
What you get is a chain reaction of stupidity is kind of what it is. Now, just to put the numbers into perspective for people so they don't come like, oh, from 3.3% to 3.6% isn't a lot. It's about trajectory, okay?
Yeah.
So the fact that you would see an immediate impact on inflation going up means that you're not only stopping the downward trajectory, but returning it to an upward trajectory at 0.75% per quarter. And that's bad. Okay. Now you can also say, well, the difference between 3.6% unemployment and 4.1% unemployment isn't bad. But again, it's about trajectory, right? That means you would see a nearly 0.5% increase in unemployment in a single quarter. And that's not great. Okay. And then these things feed
several
themselves.
million people out of work.
It's a lot of people out of work. Like the math on it is complicated for a lot of reasons, but it's a hit to the economy and a big one. And not to mention that when economists see shifts in trajectory like that, their behavior changes because behavioral economics is also a thing. People's economic behavior impacts the economy. And it like the simple explanation for it is consumer confidence, right? I teach it to the kids as like how can Tinkerbell fly? Because we believe in fairies. Why is the economy working? Because we believe in the economy. It's super duper fun, right?
That's a really good analysis.
Yeah. So if like you stop believing in Tinkerbell, she dies. If you stop believing in the economy, it tanks. It's a very actually good analogy. And money is essentially magic and fairy dust. So it works on many levels is the point. But what that would do is a shift in trajectory would freak out fucking investors on Wall Street,
Yes,
and
it
they would
would.
start behaving in a specific way. And it would freak out employers, so they would start behaving in a specific way, specifically cutting their investments by holding money in savings in case they need to ride out a recession, which means they would not just slow hiring, but they would cut labor. And if you're already like suffering labor issues, which we are, this would be a kind of time where prices would be going up and the economy would be tanking at the same time. Larry Summers actually spoke to this, and he used the S word. And in economics, the S word is stagflation, because what you would see happen is an economy start to slow or stop, meaning that things are getting bad, people are losing their jobs, when the economic conditions to remedy that would push up the prices of everything. Because if you have a huge like loss of your labor force because you deport 4 million people, but then you also have corporations laying off people, now you've flooded your labor market with workers and not any jobs for them to take, right? So now unemployment's going through the roof, but because all of the labor has been cut back because of all the tariffs pushing up the prices, then like you can see how like the problems feed themselves.
Right.
And in economic policy, the way you fix high unemployment is going to trigger inflation, but the way you fix inflation is going to trigger unemployment. So if you have to fix both at the same time, you're straight fucked. It's the 1970s. It's what happened, right? Like
bad.
when the oil crisis happened, and it's because oil impacts everything, it impacts everything. So because now our economy is based on international trade, a 10% tariff across the board is essentially OPEC cutting oil 10% in the 1970s. It's an immediate direct impact that extrapolates itself through the globe. And that's not what happened in the 1970s. I'm just saying it's like the right? Like it's a 10% hit to the economy that has exponential impacts as it moves through each step of the economy because of things, lots of things that I could talk about for hours, but we don't want me to talk about for hours. But it's bad.
Well, it also has like you again the ripple effects of perception of the economy. So yeah, it would hurt the stock market, but it would also mean that the Fed would jack up interest rates again. I mean, the Fed is slowly dropping interest rates. We're kind of easing into a soft landing of the economy. If all of a sudden the projections are that inflation is going to heat up again, and that it's going to be an upward trend of inflation, and things are about to get more expensive, and freak the fuck out of all this. The Fed's gonna adjust it currently. So you have a lot of people right now that are struggling with high prices and complaining and trying to blame Biden for high grocery prices, et cetera. I can't buy a home. Well, I mean, that's just going to be
the home thing is like George W. Bush era
a
issues,
lot
all right?
worse.
So
it's going to be a lot worse if this plan goes through with and inflation ticks back up again. So
it's going to be rough.
Yeah.
So
pretty bad. It's pretty rare when you get like an assessment like this. That's pretty much like, yep.
When the guys at the Federal Reserve are backing Democrats over Republicans, the Republicans are fucking idiots. That's what I can give you.
Well, it's also, it's just like, yeah, the Democrats are sort of the moderate, neoliberal party. Like, it's just like, okay. I mean, you don't have to love it, but basically the Democrats are the party of the status quo economically.
Yeah.
I mean, now you have the Republican, now you have this like populist brand of Trump Republican that wants to blow up the economy just to help their voter base deport a bunch of immigrants. So I mean, it's just
they're doing
it's radicalism. It's extremism. It's economic extremism is what they're proposing.
And that's actually the reality of it that I think probably we should talk about more, is because they're not doing it because they actually think it'll help. They're doing it because they know it'll cause a war and they want a war. Because it will cause a war, because when the world is a powder keg. economic stability is only or is like going to help it, right? Like you can get
Right.
people to think with a level head when they have a job, they're fed and their lights are on, right?
Yep.
But the level head is a lot harder to find when they don't have a roof over their head or lights on or food to eat, right? So the more economically dire things get, the less reasonable things get. And if you are a bunch of people that wants to take advantage of unreasonableness to push conflict, which is what Republicans want, then of course they would back this plan. But if you want to maybe slow everybody's roll and get everybody like with cooler heads discussing better ideas, you're going to have to stick with the status quo for a minute because, you stop the bleeding before you start surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same. I mean, this is basically the blueprint of. It's an extreme version of the same economic plan that Republicans have had since Reagan. I mean,
I know.
their long term goal is to create a
I know.
society of, the top
Haves and have nots.
the top 1% has everything and everybody else is poor. I mean, that's just what they've been trying to do for decades. This is just much more explicit way to get there.
Yeah, they are pretty much just being pretty
Eliminating
clear
income
about it
tax,
these days.
eliminating taxes for rich people and skyrocketing the price of consumer goods to make poor people pay for the federal government. I mean, it's just it's completely regressive. It's what they've been trying to do for years.
Yep.
And it's couched in this like populism, like, oh, we're gonna help. And they've got these people so convinced that it's a good thing for them. They've got like working class Americans convinced that this is a good idea. It's like, no, man, like this is Reaganism. This is trickle down. This is they're screwing you. They want to screw you economically. They want you to be poor.
They're taking advantage of the fact that people don't understand the economy because they intentionally made the economy overly complicated so they could, get away with all of this shit. So
a couple of other quick stories and we'll get into the deep dive. InfoWars, infamous InfoWars, Alex Jones is no more. InfoWars is being shut down. Alex Jones famously sued by the families of the Sandy Hook victims after he spread just absolutely disgusting conspiracy theories and ruined their lives and led to them getting the parents getting death threats and having to move 5 times. He was sued and the families were awarded, well, Jesus Christ, what was it, $50 billion or something like that?
$787 million. And I remember because it was the million version of the billion version of the recession because it made me mad.
So I guess the final judgment was $1.5 billion defamation judgment. He had they ordered a trustee to basically take over his assets because he continued to spend like a drunken sailor.
Well, he was trying to get his money's worth before he had to give it up is what he was doing, which says everything about him,
In roughly the year after the judgment, he was still buying like $700 dinners and going on expensive trips and all that stuff, not behaving like somebody who owed $1.5 billion and didn't have it. So they assigned him a trustee. Officially, the trustee has informed the court that he will be liquidating all of InfoWars assets, which is basically entirely owned and controlled by Alex Jones. He's like the sole proprietor of InfoWars.
Does that mean his supplements are gone too?
I think so. Yeah. They're calling it an orderly wind down of the company. So liquidating all assets and inventory and shutting down all operations of InfoWars. Speaking of, duality of man, that's just an evil scumbag person right there. Getting not enough, but getting what he deserves. So
I know he's so disgusting. Can you imagine losing your child like that and then being attacked for there's not a corner in hell dark enough for that man.
I told you, I said it on this show, I would kill him if something happened to my child and this dude went out of his way to make our lives even worse after experiencing that. I would fucking kill him. Like, I can't believe it. I can't. He's like monsters exist, and they look like that guy. But anyway, InfoWars is just a source of horrendous conspiracies and just really, really bad influence on society for years now. So
good riddance.
So yeah, debate this week. We talked about it a little bit coming up on Thursday. Biden, Trump, CNN debate, no audience. moderated by Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, which the Trump campaign is using to suggest that the debate will be rigged, but only if he loses, Kathy. If he wins, it wasn't.
Obviously.
So let's get into your deep dive. Oh, the other thing is that he says that his VP will be announced. He said that his VP pick is in. He will be announcing it, I guess, right before the debate.
At the debate. That's what he's going to do. He's going to do it at the debate.
Yeah.
Because he's going to try and distract from his debate performance with that bullshit. Oh my God, what a fucking clown.
Yeah, that'll be the headline for the evening. Or sorry, he hopes it'll be the headline for the evening. So let's gear up for your deep dive. I just remember the Trump Biden debate in 2020 was abysmal. It was awful. It was a horrible thing to watch. But it just killed presidential debates, really. I mean, if you're going to look at the history of it. But let's get into your thing here. So we have a PowerPoint. We have a Cathy candid PowerPoint slide presentation here that we're going to go through.
All right. So I made a PowerPoint. It is delightful. Look at me go. It's actually not like that fancy because I didn't even pick like fancy backgrounds. I just made sure to get everything in here. So we're going to go through, as you can see, this is how I do it with the class too. I kind of do a little, woo, this is where we're going. And then go back to the beginning. So if they saw something that looked interesting, which I know, I'm sure you all saw a few things that looked interesting that you want me to talk about. Now you know to pay attention, right? So I'm going to go through modern era debates, but I'm calling them the modern era debates because I don't want to start with like the Lincoln Douglas debate like everybody always does, like the format of debates and the response and the rebuttals and blah, blah. Shut up. We can do it later if you want. But no, and it's perfectly fine. But I think for the context of what we're all expecting on Thursday, right? Like an analysis of modern era debates is going to be a little bit more practical than Lincoln Douglas because this is not going to be a Lincoln Douglas debate. Y'all, if you're expecting a Lincoln Douglas debate, you are out of luck. That is not at all what you are going to be seeing.
That decorum has gone bye-bye.
Correct. So for the history, we are going to start with John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in 1960 because why the fuck not? And the reason
first televised debate.
And that's exactly kind of why I wanted to start here, because this is the new era of political debates. It's the new era of politics. And you're actually going to see a lot as when medias kind of change, when technology kind of develops and changes the way that people interact and communicate with each other, so too is that reflected in presidential politics. And you see it very clearly in the 1960 debate because it's the transition from, video killed the radio star, essentially radio audiences versus television audiences, how candidates are perceived and all of that kind of stuff, right? So most people probably learned about this in school, right? Like Troy, I'm pretty sure you had a class at one point where the Nixon-Kennedy debate of 1960 showed up on a PowerPoint slide, correct?
It's always, you always learn about it because you learn that on TV, it was clear that Kennedy won, but the people that were listening on radio thought Nixon won.
Yep.
And the power of TV is incredible.
Right. Well, and that's always been the takeaway lesson is the power of TV, right? But this is also a very new era candidate versus old era candidate.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And that is perceived not just in how they appeared on television and radio, respectively, but who was listening to them on TV and radio, respectively. Okay. So here you're going to see Kennedy had his hair done. He had his makeup done. And
he was camera ready. He understood that he had to look good on camera.
He was camera ready, and Nixon had the flu, like famously had the flu. Okay. And you can see, I found a picture of him here where he's wiping his nose. There's like pictures of like he's got sweat beading on the top of his head, but with like out the powder to absorb the sweat like Kennedy had, who also had like his suit all prim and proper. So you have the young, handsome, prepared for television Kennedy versus the sniffling, sweaty old man Richard Nixon, who wasn't exactly dripping in charisma anyway when he didn't have a snot rag in his hand. So with snot rag, less than appealing.
They were basically the same age, weren't they? I mean, I know Nixon was a little bit older, but like they were kind of around the same age.
In his soul, he was a fucking 1,000 years old.
Yeah.
Yes, because
he was also those things where like he didn't get it. Like he didn't get that you put on makeup because the camera washes out your face. It was like, I'm a man. I'm not putting on fucking makeup.
Right. He was a curmudgeon-y old man. As a 12-year-old, I'd be willing to bet. Right. There's some Chidi Anagonye energy there in how like particular he is about things. But the demographics were at play too, because in the 1960s, older audiences were listening on the radio
Right.
because older audiences had grown up listening to the radio and had grown to trust radio broadcasts because FDR, fireside chats, and all of that kind of crap, right? And TV audiences were generally younger audiences. So the narrative that Kennedy won the TV audiences because he's more handsome and more put together and looks more like a politician kind of ignores the fact that it was really generational in seeing and relating to a younger candidate on television versus hearing an old curmudgeon on an old curmudgeon technology. It's a similar kind of dynamic to the boomers and their Fox News on cable TV and the kids with their TikToks and their Instagrams, right? Like social media versus traditional media influencing politics in a similar way in 1960 to how TV and radio were competing with audiences and perspectives, right? So that's what I always think is really interesting to teach about the Nixon-Kennedy debate. Plus, I just love talking about Nixon in any way, shape, or form. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
But yeah, needless to say, like Nixon was the experienced candidate going into this one. He'd been the vice president for Eisenhower, and Kennedy was sort of like a newcomer. He was like a nobody. He needed name recognition, and putting him on the stage next to Richard Nixon made people take him seriously as well.
Right.
Like hearing him on the radio is another thing, but the visual of on equal footing, on television, both behind a podium, both being given equal time and respect, legitimized Kennedy's candidacy for people who had only seen him as like, you know, a young senator war hero, sure, but, you know, who the fuck is he? Does he have any experience? Well, he sure looks like he's got his shit together up there, doesn't he? And
Plus, he's Catholic. That was a
though
big
that wasn't
problem for a
helping him.
lot of fucking people.
It was a big problem, but Nixon was a Quaker, so
Yeah,
they
it was
had-
kind of like pick your poison there.
it
But
was a little
Nixon
bit
was-
thick. You're crazy, so
But Nixon was kind of the heir apparent. I mean, he was the vice president to
Yeah,
Eisenhower,
exactly.
who was incredibly popular. I mean, when Eisenhower left office, like everybody loved Eisenhower. So you had,
is-
but Nixon had really kind of shit all over himself. I mean, he was not popular at all. He should have won away. You know, if it was any other two candidates, I think the Republican would have won in this scenario. But you had just this guy Nixon who nobody liked versus Kennedy, who was like you couldn't help but fall in love with Kennedy. I mean, he was just
well,
so
yeah, and that's
perfect.
the thing. And it's not like Nixon was a bad candidate. And truthfully, Nixon in 1960 would have probably been better than Nixon in 1968. But
Well, by 68,
that's-
he was, you know, he was so
Yeah,
angry.
like that's a different story altogether. But like Nixon should have won this, and I think this election kind of made Nixon a little bit the way he was because he had no reason to lose this election other than the fact that right here in this moment, Kennedy came across as way more credible than he should have. And Nixon never had the gravitas, like that political it factor to get it back. And like Nixon would have been a perfectly capable and, you know, successful president at this time. But the changing dynamics of modern politics, that what happened as media and communication changed, Nixon and the Republican Party at large was not prepared for it, and the Democratic Party in this moment was prepared for it, and Republicans never got over that fact. I can promise you by the fact by the reality that the next presidential debate to happen was in 1976. So let's look at this again. We have
I didn't know that.
1960, and then we have 1976. Now,
They
to
just
be
didn't do
fair,
them for a while.
they just didn't do them because let's look at our candidates involved. Kennedy was shot in the face, so that doesn't really motivate people to want to put themselves on a debate stage for the world to see, you know, fair. And Nixon had his political career handed to him on a debate performance, so he's not exactly lining up to, you know, debate,
So-
right?
I guess you're right. I guess the only logical two would have been Johnson Goldwater in 64. I guess you're right. I guess they never debated. They did a lot of like TV commercials against each other, but I guess you're right.
They
never
loved
debated.
the TV commercial. That was the era of TV commercials, but they didn't go on TV because in 64 political tensions were high, and you don't want to put a heated debate on television to add to that. That is continuously true in 1968 because, you know, the clusterfuck that was the prime. You're not going to add fuel to that fire with presidential debates. And in 1972, there was a Watergate scandal playing out during the election that I'm pretty sure Richard Nixon, given his previous history with debates, would not have wanted to address on a debate stage. So there just was not another presidential election or campaign, because in 1974, Ford isn't going to be like, let me go ahead and talk about that pardon of Nixon really fast. Not going to be the thing that happened. So 1976, we have Carter and we have Ford. And this is like a couple. Yeah. So this is after Watergate, after the pardon of Nixon, all of that stuff. And Gerald Ford is not a popular president because of all of those things. And he's facing Jimmy Carter, who is just too pure for this world. He's just too pure for this world. So they had 3 total debates. And in each one, Gerald Ford looked increasingly inept. And in each one, Jimmy Carter looked increasingly trustworthy. Now, Jimmy Carter was kind of the political novice here. He was just like a peanut farmer, like boy from Georgia. I'm pretty sure he was the governor of Georgia or representative or some political thing. Yeah, he was governor of Georgia. His family had deep roots in Georgia, all of that stuff. But where this debate went horribly wrong for Mr. Ford was kind of an accident on his part, but it made him look really stupid. So it's actually linked here in the video and it's queued up. So I'm going to let Troy play Gerald Ford losing the 1976 presidential election in a debate.
Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence and occupying most of the countries there and making sure with their troops that it's a communist zone, whereas on our side of the line, the Italians and the French are still flirting with possibility?
I don't believe, Mr. Frankel, that the Yugoslavians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Romanians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Poles consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. Each of those countries is independent, autonomous. It has its own territorial integrity. And the United States does not concede that those countries are under the domination of the Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, I visited Poland, Yugoslavia, and Romania to make certain that the people of those countries understood that the President of the United States and the people of the United States are dedicated to their independence, their autonomy, and their freedom.
Yikes.
So what
the fuck is he talking about?
This is one of those moments, and this is where I a little bit feel bad for him, because it's one of those moments where he was trying to say something but actually said something completely different,
right?
Because of his
and God bless him, he tried to save himself. He did.
Yeah, and it was because of his delivery, because he has that sort of the kind of monotone delivery. He
is a football player.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. But he was trying to convey strength. He was trying to be like, no, fuck you, Soviets. You don't control them. They're independent. We got your back. Blah, blah, blah. But what
he was trying to convey, like, don't worry, U.S. has got your back, Eastern Europe, something
right.
Like
but what it came across as is the Soviets aren't a problem. It's fine. I've been there. They're totally cool. They know we'll help them. And it made him look a little bit like, the fuck are you talking about? Meanwhile, Jimmy Carter's there with like statistics and facts and information and
just made him look like an idiot and make him look like he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about.
It made him look like, and that's why historically a lot of times you'll hear him called the Homer Simpson of presidents. And I have a little picture here, like he a little bit got that reputation because of this moment where it appeared like the Soviet threat and the Cold War was like the biggest fucking thing anybody had been dealing with for a couple decades now. And he was just like, nuh-uh, I fixed that, and like that's how it came across. And everyone was just like, I'm going to go with the peanut guy, like that didn't pardon the felon,
Seinfeld, Mickey, and Kramer. You didn't realize communism was a big issue. What do you think's been going on in the world for the last 75 years?
Yeah, it's a very, very much one of those moments. So they decided to trust the good old Christian boy from Georgia who seems to be able to, function
He was a
in
better
grown-up
choice.
settings. Yeah, and there you go. So that was the 76 debate.
Cool.
Which brings us to, does anybody know? What does that bring us to?
It's got to be 80 with Reagan and Carter.
Fucking Reagan and Carter, 1980. Okay, so we all know. Now,
Carter gets his ass beat by Ron.
Well, because for a specific, fucking fuckery reason, they only had one presidential debate in the end. That's all they could agree to. Because remember, there was an Iranian revolution. There were hostages. There was a whole bunch. There was some shit going on. Not to mention a economy in calamity that was actually triggered by Nixon's price controls. But again, a conversation for another day. But Carter's the sitting president, and here, I know when we think of Reagan right now, he's the infamous bad guy that ruined the whole world. We all know who he is now. But in 1980, he'd been the governor of California, and California was a juggernaut, but not quite the juggernaut it is today politically. It was important. It was there. We all knew California, but California 1960 something when Reagan was governor was not the 1960 or was not the California of 1980 or the California of today, if that makes any sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he had been governor of California. He'd been an a B-movie actor during the war. He'd been a spokesperson for GE. He was famous in his little world of nefarious politics, but he wasn't as nationally well known as obviously Jimmy Carter, the sitting president. So the debate stage was going to be where he, legitimized himself next to an actual president, if that makes any sense. He'd been on the campaign trail. He'd been doing his thing. He was his gipper. He had his charm, but this was his moment to prove himself policy wise. And in the years since this debate, it has come out that his campaign stole Jimmy Carter's debate prep book, and that's why he performed so well in this debate, is because he knew everything Jimmy Carter was going to say because he stole his homework, right?
Just like everything he did, he couldn't do it honest. He had cheated. He was also working with the Iranians and telling them that hold off so he could take credit for.
But all that aside, there was also the idea that once again, the facts and figures that had helped Jimmy Carter in 76 against Gerald Ford hurt him with Ronald Reagan, because Reagan had a very same approach to politics, but he had a charismatic delivery. So now Jimmy Carter is the nerdy, guy with the facts and the figures up against the charming movie star with his catchphrases and one-liners. And I hate this so much because this is kind of the moment to me where politics stopped being serious and it started being a race for class president. It turned into catchphrases and one-liners and charming little jokes that could be played on the news instead of, policy grounded in facts and reality. And that was, it was a very pivotal moment.
I think you're 100%, because the three that we just talked about were, or I guess the two we just talked about, 60 and 76. I still can't believe that there wasn't another one in there somewhere.
I know.
Both of those debates, if you watch them, they're policy heavy. They're just extensive. This was back in the day when we still wanted our presidents to be smart and say things that we didn't necessarily understand. So the 60 debate and the 76 debate, they were very policy heavy. You're right. In the 80s, you start getting into catchphrases, and it was just about one upping each other for the, who came off with the better performance. And it stopped being about what the, who had the better plan. No one gave a shit about whose plan was better.
60 was where people started to care what they looked like and sounded like, but 80 is where they only cared about what they looked like and sounded like, right? It went from all policy, no personality, to a blend of policy and personality, to no policy, all personality. And that's kind of the line where Reagan comes in. Now, we claw and grip and try to get ourselves back a little bit, but we never really quite do. I actually even just realized, because I was so eager to talk about this next campaign, that I forgot all about the debate of 84 with Reagan and Mondale.
We'll have to do it. We'll have to come back to that one, because that was crazy. I mean, that was where Mondale. That was 2 moments. I guess we don't have to come back because there's 2 moments from that. One, Reagan, the famous. I'm not going to exploit my candidate's youth and inexperience,
And
talking about
experience.
Walter Mondale being younger than him and
Yeah.
fending off the attacks that Reagan was too old. That was how he destroyed that line with a joke.
Yeah.
But then also Mondale promising to raise taxes, famously promising that he would raise taxes as president, which everyone went, "What the fuck are you talking about? Why would you promise to raise taxes?"
Which again is one of those moments where it was the right policy, but a terrible delivery.
Delivery.
Yeah, like people who knew what he was talking about knew that he wasn't going to raise like the you and me's of the country's taxes. He was going to be raising the homeboys that Reagan had helped out taxes. But all they heard was, I'm going to increase taxes. And then boom, everybody shut down because Reagan had very effectively turned everybody against the government in 1980. But yeah, 84 was just basically Reagan was the oldest candidate ever running for office, but he used the debate. I'm so mad at myself for skipping this because it's an important moment now because I've set it up for later. It was his moment of being like, I might be old, but I still got it. Look, I still got my wit. I've still got my charm. I still got like my fast little comebacks. I can make jokes. I'm fast on my feet, right?
Maybe cue it up for next time because it's relevant with the Biden stuff because again, that's how he diffuses the age argument. Because there was a lot of legitimate concern that Reagan was too old in 84. So
and that's actually, and it's like I build on the point that I never made here later in the whole presentation because I was so excited because when this joke popped into my head, I knew it would make Troy laugh, and it did. The second he saw it, like boom. So we're gonna go now from. But I forgot 88 too.
You forgot 88 too. Less to talk about in 88, but you did. I think the only thing in 88 was Michael Dukakis was so boring. Like that, it just made him look like such a robot. I mean, he couldn't he made George H.W. Bush look charismatic because of how fucking boring Dukakis was.
Maybe Dukakis really lost in his campaign appearances more than in his debates.
Oh, the tank thing.
The tank thing, right? Like the 88 debates are easy to forget because they're easy to fucking forget. It was Michael Dukakis and George W. or H.W. Bush. So it was a very monotone. And that's kind of what I mean by like they tried to pull it back to policy there a little bit, but with two people that weren't going to win anybody over anyway, right? So basically you can see that I just basically trauma dumped like out the 80s. I was like, all right, Reagan happened and then move away to the 90s. I want to skip.
Let's get to the three-way. I just want to get to the three-way.
I wanted to skip the 80s entirely just because that like Reagan was kind of known as the great communicator. He was known as the master debater.
Yeah, he was definitely a master debater.
Yeah, and that's kind of the takeaway in general from the 80s era of political debates. Like Reagan came in with one-liners, quick responses, and wit, and that dumbed down politics throughout the entire 80s to that kind of thing, right?
Again, before Reagan, we wanted presidents that were smarter than us, and then post Reagan, we wanted presidents that were, that were dumber than us or something, or like presidents that we just all we wanted was for a president was to understand what our presidents were talking about. Ever since Reagan, presidents have to dumb down. If they're not able to dumb down really complex issues, people don't want to hear about it. Whereas back in the day, they could actually have a conversation about policy, and they'd give a fuck if people understood what they were talking about.
Yeah, and it didn't completely overnight switch in 1980, but you see the trajectory switch, right? So by 88, you're back to policy level discussions, and George H.W. Bush very famously in his acceptance speech for the nomination, read my lips, no new taxes, right? And during his presidency, he does in fact raise taxes, which was the correct move. It is exactly what he needed to do economically speaking. But it pissed off a rich dude in Texas enough to bring us the three-way of 1992.
Woo! All right, okay. Here we go.
All right, so
I saw this and I giggled, Cannon.
I know.
That loves me a good presidential three-way.
So this is the most boring three-way in the history of three-ways, okay? It is sitting President George H.W. Bush with Ross Perot, who, to describe him to those who don't know, lands somewhere between the guy on the cover of Mad Magazine and Jeff Bezos, right? That's who he with
is
personality
really like just cheeseball Texas sort of Southern drawl, high
Yeah, but
pitched,
like
sort of whiny.
yeah, but like
Yeah.
Bezos has that same kind of like high pitched whiny voice. So like yeah, a Texas version of Jeff Bezos meets like Arthur, what's his name? Mad Magazine guy.
Yeah, I know you're talking. I can't remember his
You
name.
know what I'm talking about, right? He
Yeah,
has
the
a
Mad
name,
Magazine
whatever.
guy. Yeah.
Mad Magazine guy, right?
Yeah.
So those two crusty old dudes, right? Both with silver spoons wedged up their asses, good, well, high enough to give them good posture, are standing awkwardly on the stage next to Bill Clinton in his prime. Now, I need to preface this. I need to disclaimer this. I need people to understand. I need everybody to just set aside for a moment how creepy we know Bill Clinton to be now. Okay, because we have 30 some odd years of hindsight to have looked into who Bill Clinton turned out to be. But in 1992, Bill Clinton was it. Okay.
He was hot.
He was the
He played
young,
the saxophone.
handsome. I was getting there. You know, he was young, he was handsome, he was standing next to George H.W. Bush, which made him look younger and more handsome. He was a Southern Democrat, which was appealing to a lot of people because it meant he could, you know, toe the line of the Republic. Like he could work with Republicans better. Southern Democrats.
He was a moderate Democrat, and
Uh-huh.
the first one in a couple decades. The Democrats have gotten used to pretty left wing candidates, and he was he was a centrist, if not
well,
a
and
sort
that
of
was
center right.
Yeah, and that was important because what the 80s had taught the Democrats was, or not taught them, but I guess instilled fear into them. Like the Reagan era made them think that they had gone too far to the left. And the
Yeah.
political narrative that Republicans pushed during the Reagan era was convincing people of that. Now, had they in reality gone too far left? No, but they'd gone too far left for Reagan's comfort, and that was enough, and that was sold, and that was what it was. So Democrats, fearing political irrelevancy and reading the political tea leaves, pulled themselves back to center, and that's what Bill Clinton was supposed to be. Okay. And an important thing to understand here is that he seems like a safe alternative to Republicans that were unhappy with H.W. Bush, because H.W. Bush had actually negotiated the terms of the NAFTA trade agreement, but it didn't actually go into effect or be signed until Clinton came into office.
Mhm.
And he was a Democrat that would have agreed to NAFTA, which is why he was a Democrat that Republicans weren't as afraid of at the time, because NAFTA was a Republican dream, not a Democratic dream. But Bill Clinton was
a Democrat who said the era of big government is over. I mean,
he was a Democrat who was advantageous enough to read the political tea leaves in a way that he could. And where he was actually really, really smart, and where I feel like, despite how creepy and gross he is, he deserves a little bit of credit historically, is he came about at a time in politics where you weren't going to win the arguments of putting the government in charge of things. Like the country was very much drinking the Kool-Aid of corporate partnerships. And Bill Clinton at least had an idea how to do that in a way that would help people more than the corporations would have wanted to. Right. He had a way of at least making the best of that bad situation, because he's good at working with, as somebody from Arkansas is good at working with bad resources, I guess. I don't know.
If you view him as in the Reagan era, I mean, he was definitely sort of a humanitarian Reaganite, whereas like Reagan, even H.W. Bush was better than Reagan, but Reagan would have just steamrolled over everybody. He didn't care.
Yeah. But to give you an idea of where American politics was at that time, when Bill Clinton was elected, they saw him as a very left-wing candidate. Like that's how far the country had gone to the right at the time. Like we look at him as, oh, he was essentially a Republican that was palatable. But at the time, that was as far left as the country was willing to go. Like if that gives you an idea of just what the 80s did to this country politically. Like
sorry, go ahead. Finish your.
No, go ahead. Because you were going to.
I was just going to say, like he had red lines. I mean, he said the era of big government was over, but he had red lines. I mean, he famously said in a conversation with Newt Gingrich that he didn't care if his approval rating went down. He slammed on the desk, stood up, and yelled in Newt Gingrich's face that if he didn't care if his approval rating went down to 3%, he was not going to cut Medicare and Medicaid. And he's sort of looked back on, negatively for welfare reform, but Republicans wanted to cut welfare, and then he saved it. He got it. They trimmed it back, but he saved it. So it's all like, you know, the 94 crime bill too. We look back on that, we're like, oh, that was fucked up. But at the time, that was what Black communities were asking for, because there was an epidemic of gang and drug violence, and the 94 crime bill was enormously popular in its day. So it's just like, it gets a lot of the Clinton successes get kind of washed away with you know, with hindsight. But at the time, I mean, you know, he was a great president. I mean, he left office with a balanced budget, booming economy, you know,
a 63% approval rating.
63% approval rating. I mean, we really weren't I mean, we were involved in wars, but I mean, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't crazy.
Like, they were 20-minute long wars. Like, that's the thing with the Clinton era, is like, were there wars? Sure. They lasted about 4 days at a time, typically, right?
The worst thing about
that's not even an exaggeration, right? Like,
yeah. I think the worst thing about Clinton's presidency, other than the scandals, was probably his like 30-minute wars. I mean, he pulled us out of the second we got hit, and this is a, you know, side point, but the second we got hit in Somalia, Clinton was like, all right, we're out. And just really sort of, it was not a great sort of foreign policy war president at all.
Well, no, I mean, he was pretty successful in some of his campaigns, though. He was just so successful that it didn't take any time. So he didn't really get to, like, you know, relish in the glory of what he did, because, like you said, he knew, like, what he was good at was knowing what he could win and knowing what he like couldn't. Yeah. Like, he knew when to stop throwing good after bad. And was he always perfect? No, but did he have some, you know, successes that get overlooked? Yeah, he definitely did have some successes that are overlooked.
And then there was the whole, like, Hillary. Hillary was his Eleanor Roosevelt.
Hillary
she was to the left of him. He put her in charge of healthcare, and she wrote a plan for single payer healthcare, Hillary Care, which the Republicans killed.
Yeah, and arguably she has always been his Achilles heel. Like, some people say he took her down. I stand by she took him down for a lot of reasons, but again, that's a conversation all its own. But to your point earlier, is a lot of the things that people get mad at, like 90s era Democrats for conceding to Republicans, wasn't a concession, it was a salvage. You know, like, it's not that they gave this up or agreed with it. It's that's all they could hold in that political climate. And again, that's just something that needs, you know, better messaging across the board. But that was the Bill Clinton thing. The really funny part is, and this is it, like, HW and Ross Perot came across as like the curmudgeon-y old men, right? Like, George H.W. Bush was checking his watch at one time. Ross Perot was just awkwardly standing and awkwardly, like, he just like looked so goofy and weird. There was one point in the debate where the two of them just start yelling at each other, and Bill Clinton's just sitting there like looking mad sexy, you know? And it was just it like 92 was so funny for debates, because it
Perot definitely was a spoiler for Bush, so you could tell, like, that Bush was really not happy that Perot was there.
Well, Perot was running for the, like, sole purpose of sticking it to H.W. Bush because he was mad about the tax increases, right? And, like, political scientists, like, they've gone through and they've said, oh, Perot probably pulled votes equally from Clinton and H.W., which speaks to the politics of the time. But whether that's true or not, Perot had an intention of who he wanted to steal votes from, and it was not Bill Clinton. He may have gotten some, but his goal was to go after HW, and it worked. So this is basically a three-way that ruined a marriage, because Ross Perot got in the middle of this thing, and HW ended up getting kicked out of his house and having to start a new life.
Is there anything about Clinton's legacy that, like, didn't involve, like, ruining marriages and you know, trysts and three ways?
And I hope historians never write it any other way, because it at least adds a certain, like, flavor to his era, you know?
Different ways to enjoy cigars, you know, just all that stuff.
Jesus Christ. Okay, so I've skipped 96 as well, because it's a similar vein, right? Because it's Ross Perot coming back again, and Bill Clinton again running against fucking Bob Dole. So very much the same goddamn energy.
Was there even an election in 96? I mean, there was no... Republicans even knew in 96 there was no fucking way that Bill Clinton was going to lose that election. I mean, they ran Bob Dole to kind of salvage the party as a whole. They didn't actually think that Bob Dole was going to beat Bill Clinton.
No, and I think the reason they put Bob Dole up there is because remember, like during the Reagan era, there had been that like fucking wild ass marriage of the Republican Party to the Christian right.
Yeah.
And in the 90s, there was like that was where the battle line had been basically drawn as to whether the Christians were going to take over the party or if the Christians were going to be manipulated by the party. That was the battleground. It was, are we here to cut Social Security or are we here to put the 10 Commandments in school? And the cut Social Security people had been manipulating the 10 Commandments in school people for a while, but the 10 Commandments in school people were gaining power there in the 90s. And I think Bob Dole was sort of the party sending a message at large, like, no, we want to be the nerdy policy guys. We don't want to be the 10 Commandments in school guys, right? And that brings us to the 2000.
And then Bob Dole lost and became the adorable spokesperson for erectile dysfunction. So.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. But Bob Dole losing basically gave the Christians the ammunition they needed to say that they should be in charge.
Right.
And that brings us to and to 2000 to George W. Bush.
That brings us to W.
To W, right? And to the Republican Party, he was the perfect candidate because he was supposed to be policy-wise his dad, but personality-wise, the Christian rights darling. And he was the Christian rights darling. And for those of us who know, we know. Like, God, they loved him for some reason. Like, the born-again Christian former cocaine addict George W. Bush running against class president Al Gore. And that's what this whole election was. It was the class president versus the class clown. And every aspect of this election, start to finish, reinforces that reality. So Al Gore had been around for a while. He was tied up in Bill Clinton's administration, both good and bad. He kind of tried to distance himself from Bill Clinton for a variety of reasons, like the impeachment, the sex scandal, the everything, right? He's like, I'm going to do my own thing here a little bit. But he has all the personality of a wet noodle, which is hilarious because he's actually supposedly like a really fun, cool guy. Like he does guest spots on Futurama. His daughter is a comedy writer for Futurama, but like he himself is wet paint, right? And again, he is like a policy guy, like nerdy, wants to sound smart, coming in here with all the knowledge of the economic success of the 1990s, plans moving forward, wants to tackle the climate crisis in a way that spurs economic growth. Like everything progressives want right now was Al Gore in 2000. So they voted for Ralph Nader. It's fine. I'm not mad about it or anything. Still to this day. It's fine. But at the same token, like as dumb as George W. Bush is in hindsight, in 2000, he was kind of young and silly and goofy. He was the guy everyone wanted to have a beer with. So you have like this uptight policy guy
again,
with his
the president, like
figures.
Wanting to have a beer with the president became like a thing. It's like, really? Like, I don't, fuck.
Yep. And that's what this was. It was Al Gore's boring and George W. Bush's charming. So very much feeding off the Reagan era stuff. So Republicans were having a moment where they wanted George W. Bush to be his dad, but he had probably always wanted Reagan's approval, not his dad's, because he had a fucked up relationship with his dad. You know what? It's just fine. George W. had daddy issues, as the war in Iraq proved to us. But in the debates, he was the goofy, fun guy versus the stuffy stuffed shirt guy. And he had, a bunch of things in his favor. He had the name recognition, right? His brother was the governor of the state he needed to win. The Supreme Court was packed with judges his dad put there. So it's fine. I'm bitter about 2000. I'm pretty sure we all know I'm bitter about this was like my political, awakening. This is where it all started. This election pissed me off so fucking much that it turned me into what I am today.
The 2000 election was your political awakening. The Harrison Ford and Indiana Jones was your sexual awakening. So we kind of know we kind of know where
specifically you came from. The Last Crusade. It was River Phoenix, Harrison Ford, and Sean Connery all in the same movie. You know what? I stand by this one. I'm correct. Those are three beautiful men that were running around in leather with whips. Oh, okay, I'm gonna stop. Okay,
that was when Cathy became a woman.
Anyhow, so that is the historical debates that are relevant to the past.
Nice.
Then there's the next bit I have, which is part 2 deep dive, the debates of Biden and Trump specifically. So
I think we'll hit those next week, and then next week we'll be able to add the one that's about to happen.
Yeah. So I have through the vice presidential debates of 2008, 2012, all of it. So with all of these debates of the past in mind, watch on Thursday, right? And then we'll go into yes, some more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cathy. Wonderful as always. Subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/justbuylesscoffee. We get some extra stuff with Cathy and I. We got some interesting new things coming up in the next couple of months. So stay tuned for that. If you're listening on the audio only versions on Spotify, Apple, Google, Podchaser, all those, find the download button. Make sure you're downloading the episode to your local device. If you want to see the video episodes, the video versions of the regular episodes, go to YouTube, youtube.com/justbuylesscoffee. You can check out Cathy and I's pretty mugs. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. We'll see you next week with an update on the catastrophic debate that's about to happen on Thursday, and probably some crazy Supreme Court news, so you won't want to miss next week. Thank you, Cathy, for an excellent conversation, and we will see everybody next time. You've been listening to Just Buy Less Coffee, answering the deeper questions of American politics, featuring Troy Matthews at Keep Troy Blue and Cathy Cannon at Cannon's Fodder. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and X. All opinions are our own.